So I think we've got enough people to go ahead and get started. So in the interest of time, I'll call the meeting to order. This is the July 28th meeting of the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee. I am Mary Longacre, the chair. This meeting is being recorded, both audio and video. If there's anybody here other than the town who is making a recording, please notify the chair before doing so. And this meeting will be broadcast on the town's government TV YouTube channel after the meeting has concluded. Okay. So permit me to confirm, let me start with the other piece first. Yeah. Okay. This meeting is being conducted remotely consistent with Governor Baker's executive order of March 12th, 2020, due to the current state of emergency in the Commonwealth due to the outbreak of the COVID-19 virus. In order to mitigate the transmission of the COVID-19 virus, we have been advised and directed by the Commonwealth to suspend public gatherings, and as such, the governor's order suspends the requirement of the open meeting law to have all meetings in a publicly accessible physical location. Further, all members of public bodies are allowed and encouraged to participate remotely. The order, which you will find posted with the agenda materials for this meeting, allows public bodies to meet entirely remotely so long as reasonable public access is afforded so that the public can follow along with the deliberations of the meeting. Ensuring public access does not ensure public participation unless such participation is required by law. This meeting will allow if time allows, we have a one-item agenda and limited time. We need to make sure we get through that agenda item. So if time allows, public comment will be allowed. However, it may not be if we do not have the time available. For this meeting, the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee is convening by video conference via the Zoom app as posted on the town's website, identifying how the public may join. Please note this meeting is being recorded and that all attendees are participating by video conference. Accordingly, please be aware that other folks may be able to see you and to take care not to share the screen on your computer. Anything you broadcast may be captured by the recording. All supporting materials that have been provided to members of this body are available on the town's website unless otherwise noted. The public is encouraged to follow along using the posted agenda unless the chair notes otherwise. Okay, please remember to mute your phone or computer when you're not speaking. Please remember to speak clearly and in a way that helps generate accurate minutes. For any response, please wait until the chair yields the floor to you and state your name before speaking. If members wish to engage in a conversation with other members, please do so through the chair, taking care to identify yourself. After members have spoken, the chair will afford public comment to those members of the public that have joined the meeting via Zoom. Members of the public who wish to speak must state their names and be acknowledged by and speak through the chair. Also a reminder to the public that you're welcome to submit comments in writing as well as participating in the meeting. Finally, each vote taken in this meeting will be conducted by roll call vote. So please permit me to confirm that all members and persons anticipated on the agenda are present and can hear me. Members, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Peter Brace.
Here.
Sarah Boyce.
Here.
Jennifer Carberg.
Here.
Ian Golding.
Here.
Fritz McClure.
Here.
Gary Beller.
Here.
And I do not see Matt Fee. This is Mary Longacre here. Good morning, everyone. Staff, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Vince Murphy.
Here.
Chuck Larson.
Here.
Thank you. And we have no other anticipated speakers for our agenda. Okay, Vince, did I miss anything?
No, just to quickly note that I've had an email from Deanne Atherton saying she is here, however, her microphone is not working, but she can hear everyone and she is listening. And great to have you, Deanne. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. And also note that we'd see Liz Trios on the screen, currently muted, but apparently participating. All right. So we have in front of us a discussion. First, let me thank everyone for making the time for this extra meeting and remind everyone we are trying to keep this to 1 hour. Some of our members have only that time available. Our purpose is to review the Coastal Resilience Advisory Committee's recommendation to the Select Board with Chuck Larson's comments. A copy of both our original recommendation and the recommendation with Chuck's comments was sent out to everybody and posted with the agenda. I'd like to ask the members to decide, would you rather proceed with our original document and make edits to that following with Chuck's suggestions, or would you rather accept all of Chuck's suggestions into the document and then proceed to review that document with all the suggestions incorporated? Again, in the interest of time, one might be easier to manage than the other, but I wanted to make sure the members had the opportunity to express any concerns. Sarah, go ahead.
So Sarah Boyce here. I want to accept a lot of Chuck's comments, but I think it's worth some discussion. So I don't know if it's easier to go kind of point by point, because some of the points are the same and made over and over again. So once we kind of agree on one tact, that will kind of take out a lot of the comments, if you know what I mean.
Yes, I had some difficulty when I was reviewing it initially, trying to go point by point, and had the suggestion that, you know, if all of the comments were, or I should say, you know, the majority of the comments were acceptable to the majority of the board, then perhaps we could simply start from a clean slate with all of the comments, and we can always edit, remove, improve, however you feel about any of the language in the document. Unlike our previous review, I would consider this pretty much a wide open because there are so many suggestions. So if we see our own wording that we'd want to change, perhaps because of a suggested change elsewhere, I thought it might be nice to start with a clean document. Whether that clean document is the old one or the new one, that's up to you as a committee to just give us some guidance on what you think would be the best way to proceed.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, go ahead.
Mary, I have a question. Are the comments that we are looking at that Chuck has added to our document, were those the result? I know Chuck initially did a review of the entire proposal, his famous 4-page critique. My question is, what we are looking at now, is that the result of his conversations with Vince, or are these strictly Chuck's ideas?
So let me put my interpretation on, and then I want to turn it over to Chuck and Vince for further clarification. My feeling is that, generally speaking, Chuck's suggestions here are to provide more precision in the language and to make the document more useful. And I floated that by him in a conversation, and I think he agreed to that. But Chuck and Vince, do you want to address the genesis of this final document from Chuck?
I think I'll just leave that one to Chuck, if that's acceptable.
Yeah. Thank you, Madam Chair. So yes, so the 4-page document references my comments before the select board meeting and their review. And I was asked by the town manager to put those together and submit those. And hence, it was a rather lengthy list. And some of the items were actually clarified during the discussion at the select board by Mary and by Vince. And therefore, this serves, the version you have in front of you now really serves to, let's fix it and, get it acceptable and move forward, because I'm fully behind this. I don't want to be a roadblock here. I think communication is always one of those things that can be, a challenge sometimes in the correct choice of words. And so, I've taken my comments from the 4 pages and kind of synthesized it with some additional kind of reflection. And I'll tell you a little story. So when I was looking at this with a different set of eyes after the select board meeting, I was looking at it and I had the experience, something just isn't right here and something's off. And so a big part of it came down to the terminology of projection versus scenario. And I think you'll see that information, highlighted in the document. NOAA is strictly scenarios when they talk about sea level rise. whereas other types of analysis, such as the 2018 Massachusetts analysis report, actually builds on the NOAA scenarios, but then does probabilistic modeling. So those are indeed projections. And then some of that confusion with scenario and projection was also included in the Malone and McBroom report. I went right back to the source documents to actually clarify the meaning. What's really being used here? Are these projections? Are these scenarios? And so that was kind of one of those aha moments for me, and hence you kind of see that reflected in the document. And then certainly there's some other changes that I hope serve to clarify. For instance, I heard at the select board presentation, this is really for municipal projects, and hence I added that information into the first paragraph there, or the recommendation. And we can kind of go through this line by line if you like, but I'll kind of pause it there, see if there are any questions.
Thank you, Chuck. Sarah, and then Jennifer.
So first, I just want to thank Chuck for going through this in a really detailed manner. And as a member of the committee, I really appreciate that. I just want to state at the very beginning that I really wish that we've been able to see the comments before the select board meeting. We purposely had a committee meeting beforehand to talk about, how, kind of prep Mary, and also talk about how we would respond to questions. And I think that, a lot of the confusion, because, we've been mired in it. So it's really helpful to have someone with fresh eyes see it and see where some of the things were, and we can go line by line, but like we didn't mean it that way. So it was really helpful to have some of that clarification. And so I sort of apologize that we, presented it at the select board before we had a chance to have those comments. And I think I do have some specific comments. I don't think, Mary, to answer your earlier question, it would be helpful to accept all of Chuck's comments immediately without going through, because some I agree with and some I think need more discussion and clarification. So
okay, so let me pause quickly. Does anybody feel differently than that, or is that the route we want to take? And I'm only asking, I didn't want to start off on the wrong foot and have to backtrack, so I wanted to just ask that up front. I'm not seeing any other comments. So that is the route we'll take. That's fine. Vince, if you want to prepare that document. And Jen, you had some comments as well.
Certainly. I was just going to say overall, I have no strong substantive issues with Chuck's comments. I think the majority of them we can easily accept by just discussing the scenario versus projections. That's a large part, and as well as the reference documents. I have two comments that as we go through it, I think that, as Sarah said, there are a few things to discuss. But most of them I don't have an issue with. So I think if we do the line by line as we have discussed, and then accept the broader ones and just move to the ones that need discussion. Thanks, Chuck.
Okay, Vince, did you want to add something there, or is it just swatting a fly? Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm fine.
Okay.
I'll share Chuck's, the version with Chuck's comments, and we'll just go through it line by line.
Yep.
Mary?
Yes.
I just so we're, wait a minute. Just so we're clear, for many of it, I understand that for those of you who are technically oriented, the word projection versus the word scenario may be important and significant, but that for the rest of us who are not so technical, it's probably, it seems a very technical distinction. But I'll leave that because obviously we're making a recommendation and we have to be precise. But just so, I just want to remind kind of people that there are probably several of us on the board who are on the committee that really don't even understand the difference between a projection and a scenario.
And that's sort of my comment, that Chuck is making the language more precise. From the engineering standpoint, that's kind of what engineers do. And finding out that we were unfortunately adopting an error directly from the Malone and McBroom report in that regard. So wherever NOAA says scenario, we should be following what they say and also say scenario. However, as he was saying, Massachusetts does say projection. I just think it's important that we use the same language as our source, so that there isn't any question about whether we're trying to add a layer of interpretation to it. Sarah?
Okay.
Yeah, and I totally agree with kind of, you know, everywhere where Chuck said we should change their projection to scenario. I completely agree with that. And I just want to maybe potentially for Fritz too, to your point, you know, when we adopt the NOAA scenario, that we can look at that table, for example, and look at, you know, specific numbers, where when we are looking at projections, there's a lot of, you know, variability and, you know, kind of uncertainty within that. So I think to Chuck's point, the scenario, using the word scenario, both kind of references back to the, specifically to the NOAA work, which is what we wanted. And then also is more specific. So that's kind of, remember many of our conversations were about being kind of clear with what we're recommending. So there's a clear list. And the other thing, the reason we were kind of, you know, going back to the Malone and McBroom check is I really appreciated what you said about the distinction between accepted versus adopted with the Malone and McBroom report, because we were kind of told we had to, I mean, I felt like we were told we had to use the Malone and McBroom, or that was the document the town wanted us to use. I could be wrong. That was my interpretation of some of the discussion that happened. So I'm really glad to hear that we're, you know, like acknowledging some of the confusion with that report, and that, you know, we can move on from there and use what the NOAA, specifically the original, you know, NOAA work. So that's where some of the confusion came in too, just to kind of explain ourselves, is that I thought we were supposed to be referencing the Malone and McBroom report.
Okay, anybody else have comments before we go into the specific suggestions? Jen?
I was just going to propose that we accept the change from projection to scenario, because it sounds like that's the discussion that we're all leaning towards, and then we can focus on the other comments, which have maybe some of them have a little more substance to them that we might need to discuss.
Unfortunately, and Vince, correct me if I'm wrong, there's no, we can do a find and replace, I guess, but we can't really accept a group of changes. We'd have to, if we're going to accept changes in the track documents, we have to do them one by one, unless, but we could do a find and replace. I don't know if that would make it messier though.
I can do it pretty quickly. It's not a problem. And
okay.
I think Gary has a comment.
Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
I do. First of all, I don't, with respect to the difference between projection and scenario, to me, there's not a big difference, because neither may occur. One is a projection, one is a scenario, and those words mean to me that there's no certainty to that, which brings me to the point that I want to make. I believe when we're making important decisions like this, a little saying that I always say is that the perfect is the enemy of the good. We're not going to get it perfectly because we're dealing with the uncertainty of the future. So let's be good, but let's not kill ourselves trying to be perfect. Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. In the interest of time, that's good advice. So any more comments, projection versus scenario? Are we okay with changing to the word scenario throughout our document? Right, I'm going to take that as a yes. I'm not doing votes on every little change. We'll vote on the final document once it's prepared. Vince, could you zoom in on the view? We've got a lot of extra space on the left and right. Maybe we can get a little bit bigger. There we go.
So I'm just going to start accepting changes and.
All right, so I'm going to refer back to Vince's email. There were 4 changes that were we thought wouldn't require a lot of discussion. The other word change was to change the language regarding the Malone and McBroom Coastal Risk Assessment and Resilient Strategies report to say that it was received by the town rather than accepted by the town. And in a conversation, Chuck made the point that the select board has not put a stamp on that to say that they accept it. So received is again a more correct word to put there, and I take Gary's advice seriously, but words matter, and in that particular case, I think Chuck felt very strongly that if we use the word accepted, that word had consequences that we weren't really aware of. Any discussion on that item? Nope. Okay. Looks like we can make that change as well, Vince. The paragraph in green. So harking back to our previous discussion, we had edited the document to do a direct quote from the Malone and McBroom report. And since we are now sort of cutting that report out of the middle and going straight to the NOAA data, this paragraph in green becomes superfluous here. And so we could delete it. And that would remove some confusion, particularly between the word projection and scenario. Any comments on deleting that? And then we'll get to the language following it. Okay, seeing no hands. So Vince, we can go ahead and delete that green quote in its entirety. And so that leaves us with the following paragraph being suggested by Chuck. Any comments on that? I'm not going to read that out. It's a little bit difficult to read.
Beg your pardon, Mary.
Yeah.
Just to say that it kind of increases our accuracy on the previous paragraph. That's what we're going for. That's what Chuck is going for with this. And
yes. Jen says okay, Sarah says okay, great. Okay, the only thing I'm going to do there is at the end of that paragraph, it says the 6 scenarios are provided. I would just, I would take that first sentence where it says the projections, and we're changing that to scenarios, I believe, are presented in table 1. I don't know if we need to say both of those two things. That it reads confusingly to go from the 6 scenarios are provided into the CRC recommends the following high. So we can either take out that last sentence, we can add, provided in table 1 and take that out of the first part. Just trying to make this read easily. Anybody have any comments?
It's Fritz.
Yes, Fritz.
If I understand what you're saying is, I think when we had discussed before, our thought was we don't include all of the numbers for the sake of trying to keep, or I should say, we didn't want to confuse people by a lot of numbers when in fact what we're saying is we're recommending the following numbers be used. So
Right.
Is that what you're getting at?
Right. So we're saying 6 scenarios are provided, but we're not really saying why or what for or what to do with them. I don't think that language really helps.
I agree.
But yeah. Okay. Any other comments?
Yes.
Ian?
Yes. There's a typo now on the second paragraph. Scenarios. Yeah, there you go.
Oh, thank you, Ian.
You're welcome.
Okay, so are we good with deleting the last sentence of that paragraph? Yes. Anybody? Okay, let's do that. And again, we'll do a final read through just to make sure that this document, because anytime you chop up a document, you're at risk of introducing other errors.
Am I okay to accept that sentence, that paragraph? All of this?
Yep, I think so. The other thing that was mentioned in the email is the reference to local mean sea level relative to year 2000. Again, providing more precise and useful language. Does anybody have an issue with the change that's proposed for that? No, I'm not seeing any. Vince, do you want to go ahead and accept that?
Yeah, the typo right there. Local means sea level, not seal level.
Oh yeah, that darn seal. Thank you, Peter.
Okay.
Vince, can we do a quick scroll down? If I remember correctly, page 2 had no edits.
Nothing
Yeah,
except
okay.
one comment, I think, was about it. And I think that's moved up into here now. Yep. So there's
Okay.
nothing on that table, on that page anymore.
All right, so we'll continue with the edits. I want to actually stay down at the bottom. I want to do our recommendation last. So we have the paragraph, the CRC recommends the following: high NOAA projections, change that to scenarios.
I'm just going to take the correct spelling. Hope nobody minds.
And I guess it would be singular scenario because
Correct.
we're talking about just the high. To accommodate, and then Chuck is suggesting the upward trend in sea level rise, which also worsens the impact of storm surge, high tides, and wave action. And that is opposed to accommodate our language, moderate storm surge as well as sea level rise. Any comments on that change, Sarah?
Yeah, so I think this is where some of the confusion came in, and it was mentioned in the first paragraph of our recommendation as well. When we were previously talking about this, our intent, if you go back to look at our discussion, was to say that by picking the high scenario, we're also accommodating for current storm surge predictions. And so that was in relation to the storm tide pathways data that we have. So it was kind of like, if the thought process, if I remember correctly, was if we're using the high scenario, some of those, levels align with the feet predicted for storm surge, and they're in similar areas. So I think the idea was, if we're planning, if we're, for building purposes or whatever, if we're planning, thinking of like a 6 foot sea level rise, that also corresponds to kind of current predictions of 6 foot storm surge. I could be wrong, but that's what I remember as our discussion, which is why we also referenced the storm tide pathways and storm surge at the last paragraph of the recommendation. So I think there's just confusion of future storm surge versus current storm surge.
That's pretty close to my recollection as well, Sarah. Further comments on that? Chuck?
Yeah, I might just clarify, I certainly, understand, the storm tide pathways and storm surge. They're modeled and determined based on a certain sea level. As sea level rises, it's quite likely that storm surges are going to rise as well. And so your storm surges could get deeper just based on changes in currents and the dynamics of the ocean. So I guess I was thinking of it when I'm looking at, kind of computing, water levels, I'll have a sea level, but then I will add things onto that, such as storm surge and wave heights and maybe wind effects. And, I think they're both important tools. The tide pathways is very important information. But I think you factor in storm surge before you agree to a particular tide pathway. But
do we want to keep both? So I'm just throwing this out as a suggestion. We could keep our original language and add a second sentence that incorporates Chuck's language. The upward trend in sea level will also worsen the impact of, I think that Sarah's point is that we're talking about our recommendation. We're not talking about the general science. I think that Chuck is correct in what he's saying, but it's perhaps a little bit out of context.
Yeah.
No reason why we couldn't say both if we wanted to. Any thoughts on that? Sarah?
Yeah, I think I'm fine if we want to add that, Chuck's language as well, about that the storm surge will, or the sea level rise will worsen the impact of future storm surge. But I think I still would like there to be some separation because of our recommendation that, and we do have the data cited for the current storm surge predictions, that I think that we should incorporate both of those things, if that's what you were proposing, Mary.
Yeah.
So to reference the current storm surge under the the storm tide pathways data, I think it's important for people to know that that is a current, worry or something to plan for. And then the, sea level rise will worsen those impacts, as Chuck noted. And I like the language that he uses. But I think it's important to also say that, there is the current risk.
Okay, Vince, did my suggestion make sense to you from an editor's standpoint? Keep our original sentence and add a second sentence, which is Chuck's language.
Okay, so this will look weird for a second,
Yep.
but it'll all come out in the wash, so to speak. Let's just pop it down there for 1 second. And then I can pop up the original language. Hopefully, nope, that's not going to work. All right, I can just accept them as they are for a second, and then we can edit Chuck's sentence afterwards.
And I think the other thing would to make sure we say current storm surge, so it doesn't get muddled with the scenarios.
Then we're just going to edit Chuck's sentence. So I'm open to taking whatever suggestion.
I think we get rid of the word which. And then perhaps it can stand like that.
The upward trend.
Suggestions, comments?
I'm a fan of the Oxford comma, but that's just me.
Okay, so let's go on to the last sentence of that paragraph. So I agree that just saying these data is vague. It doesn't provide direction. And so Chuck is using, again, more precise language here. Anybody have comments or questions about that change? Okay, seeing none. Vince, you want to go ahead and accept the changes to the second or to the last sentence of that paragraph?
As they are, yeah.
Yep. Sarah?
Yeah, I just wanted to go back to the first sentence and just make sure we say something about the storm surge being current storm surge. So like the CRAC recommends following the high NOAA scenario to accommodate current modern storm surge as well as sea level rise. Because the storm surge is what's happening now.
I'd argue for eliminating the word moderate because that is a value judgment and almost a prediction. I would just accommodate current storm surge would be sufficient.
Great.
Yeah.
I agree with that. Thank you, Mary.
Okay, other comments on that paragraph? Vince, what are we doing with on the next page? I think that probably still applies. It's not necessary, but I think it still applies.
Yeah, it's all in here.
Yeah.
So do you want to keep it?
Yeah. Any comments from the committee members on the next page being kept or struck? Okay. Let's go ahead and keep that. And then we'll go up in the document from there. The supporting information. So again, we're talking about the Malone and McBroom report. I actually like Chuck's suggestion to switch the language to is available, because again, you look at the report, there are no guidelines in the report. There are no specific directives. There's a tremendous amount of background information. So how do they use that? We're not providing direction. We're not speaking very clearly there. So to say that it's available is a better directive. Any thoughts on that? Okay, Gary, you had?
Is available is not a very, it's a very passive. It's just to say it's available. It doesn't really work for me very much.
Right, but I think that also,
And,
it does match the status of the report. It's the difference between saying maybe a dictionary is available to check your spelling. Yeah, I don't know, but
If I was a teacher, I would tell
Yeah.
my students to look at the dictionary. I wouldn't say
Yeah.
it's available in case you want to figure out if you're spelling the word correctly.
Yeah.
That's how I would do it.
but you wouldn't tell your student to check every word in their report in the dictionary to make sure that they had spelled it correctly.
How about maybe used?
Or how about is a reference for all staff vendors to make public, because that's what it is.
Is a reference for?
Yeah. it's
Chuck,
a
I see you nodding. Okay, Sarah.
So I think the point was that the town has not adopted it or accepted it. They have received it. So we're not necessarily advocating it for this particular report to actually be used. And so I like Gary's example of the dictionary because we all accept that the dictionary is true and good information. So you would recommend it, but you wouldn't recommend as a teacher for people to go to a random website maybe. And I don't know. I just feel like the town is saying something, and to Chuck's point of saying received instead of accepted or adopted, and so I think it can be used as a reference, but we're not making people use it as a reference. That's my opinion.
So changing that language to this is a guiding document for CRC and is a reference available. I don't know what the right word is. Is
a reference for.
The reference for all town
yeah.
staff and vendors?
Yep.
Okay.
Good.
Okay, and then the last sentence there.
Is everyone happy with this first? Sorry. Take these?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Last sentence. Ian, before I start, go ahead. Oh, you're on mute, but it seems like you're waving me off. So.
Sorry. It just, Vincent dropped the A, so now it's back in there.
Oh, okay.
Sorry about that.
So I think this last sentence is one we want to pay particular attention to. Adding the qualifier subject to flooding, I'm not particularly in favor of that because subject to flooding now is the implication, but we're really talking about flooding in the future. And so a property could be subject to flooding in the future based on sea level rise, but not subject to flooding now. And that could be interpreted by somebody to say, well, I didn't have to do anything because it's not a problem now. That was my reaction to that. Jennifer, thoughts on that?
Mary, you echoed exactly what I was thinking with this piece. That was one of the two comments that I took issue with, because while they might not be subject to flooding currently, they might be in the future. So we want to make sure that all projects that are being assessed by town boards double check whether or not sea level rise is an issue.
Okay. Other comments or thoughts on that? Yeah, Ian?
Then subject to flooding now or in the future?
No, we would just eliminate that suggested language. Projects should look at the sea level rise scenarios.
Delete it.
Okay, I'm seeing nods for deleting it. Let's go ahead and do that. And the next suggestion is to look at the sea level rise scenarios and risk tolerance that is appropriate for the expected service life of the project. So I'm looking at that all together because I think that that concept is encompassing. I'm not sure if I would say it exactly the same way, but I think there are two really good points here. The expected service life, that is something that's easily determined looking at the table. So you could use the table to reference the expected service life. I think risk tolerance is a really good point, but I'm not sure how you could evaluate risk tolerance by looking at the sea level rise scenarios. So I'm not sure where that fits. Comments or suggestions there? Chuck, yes, please.
Yeah, Madam Chair. So this was coming to how we interpret and use table 1. There might be some projects that just due to their nature have inherent adaptability And hence, you might not use the high scenario. You might design it to the intermediate scenario based on the risk and the exposure. But if this were a project such as the electrical substation, you know, you'd probably maybe even go above high. But, you know, those are project by project decisions that, you know, that's the way we're going to have to start thinking about this, is that, you know, water is going to inundate, and, you know, what are those areas that are highest risks and hence warrant that higher level of protection. Maybe it's overkill right now, but yeah, I was thinking it's a way to kind of bring this out just for basic awareness. But yeah, I can understand if you don't feel that it fits. I understand that.
Well, what I really liked about this is that in my approach to this is we're going to have to find a balance between competing objectives, and risk tolerance really speaks to that quest for finding the balance. You know, to Gary's point, we're not going to be perfect at coastal resilience. We're not going to be able to protect everything. And so risk tolerance really comes into play there to say, you know, well, we understand that there is a risk here, but we're okay with that. We have made a clear-eyed decision that whatever the alternatives are, they're less acceptable than what we're choosing right now. Or that, you know, there might be something that happens in the future that changes the scenario that we're looking at now, not from the climate change standpoint, but from the municipal use standpoint, let's say. So again, this is me speaking personally. I really would like to hear comments from the rest of the committee members. I like the idea of including risk tolerance as a factor. I'm open to leaving it there if other people think that's a good idea, or if people have suggestions to either take it out or to state it some other way. I just wanted to start that discussion. Jennifer?
I don't have a problem with leaving it in, and I appreciate the idea that although we're suggesting a particular scenario, it's also to encourage people to look beyond what that scenario might be depending on what the project is. So I think it's perfectly appropriate to leave it in here.
Other comments, Ian?
Yes, I agree with Jen, and I consider it very concise.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Other comments? Okay, sounds like we can leave it in. Is everybody comfortable then with that sentence? Projects should look at sea level rise scenarios and and I'm just having a hard time. Projects should look at the sea level rise scenarios and risk tolerance that is appropriate for the expected service life of the project. If we're happy with it, I'm just logistically trying to make sense out of it and not able to process it myself, but I might be the only one.
Just how about I just accept the changes for a minute,
Yep.
and we can put them back if
Yep.
needs be, but just so that we can all see it as it might end up appearing.
Yep. Thank you, Vince.
And Mary,
Yes.
it's Fritz.
Fritz, yep.
I don't know. I think I agree with you. I think the sentence is a little confusing because it all modifies the expected life of the project. So I don't know. And so I'll change it around, but maybe it changes the meaning. So should it be project should look at the sea level rise scenario appropriate for the expected, sea level rise. I guess what I'm trying to get is at the sea level rise scenarios modifying, coming together with expected service life,
Right.
and risk tolerance as appropriate for the project, as opposed to appropriate for the service life of the project. You understand it?
Well, we're recommending the high scenario, but then we're telling them to look at all the scenarios and, you know, pick whatever one they want. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, this goes back to a little bit to the comment that I was making when speaking with my planning board hat on, in terms of for this particular recommendation, which is an interim recommendation. It's not a hard, this is what you should do. It's simply a suggestion about what we think they ought to be looking at in the interim till the final report comes out. And speaking as a planning board member, my comment has always been, don't expect me as a planning board member to understand necessarily what all of the science is, because I've got to make a decision as a planning board member as to what you're telling me I should use. So the more subjective you make my job, the more difficult it is for me to be able to make that determination. So that's why I just thought that last sentence, I don't mind the fact that risk tolerance is subjective, and I don't mind that it's in there. I think it's appropriate. I just want to make sure we're using it in the right way, I guess.
So Fritz, you gave me an idea. This paragraph is about supporting information, and this sentence is a directive. I don't think this sentence belongs in this paragraph. I think what we might be able to do is incorporate the reference to risk tolerance and expected service life into our recommendation above. Does that make sense to people? So Vince, if you can scroll up just a little bit.
Makes sense to me.
So we'd say the CRC, so I'm reading the bold text at the top. The CRC recommends all town departments, boards, commissions, and committees, and any service providers, contracted engineers, and consultants need to be aware of and need to use the NOAA high scenario to accommodate moderate storm surge as well as sea level rise in their decisions, deliberations, and planning of municipal projects. We could continue that, long sentence to say, taking into account the risk tolerance and expected service life of each project. Does that make sense to people? Do we want to put that up into our recommendation?
Well,
I like that better.
Ian?
well, I guess, I mean, I totally take your point, Fritz, but it seems to me that in supporting information, the very first sentence says sea level rise data and coastal resilience strategies are listed in the Town of Nantucket Coastal Resilience Assessment and Strategies Report. So to me, it makes sense to keep it there, because if you move it up, then I don't see, it seems isolated. It doesn't seem to be anything that's particularly leading into it. While with supporting information, it's led into, so maybe this is angels on the pin. I don't have a hard opinion one way or the other. I do think it's sensible to bring it in at some point.
Other comments? Peter, anything to add there?
Yeah. This is just a general comment about that sentence that Vince has in gray. I just don't think the sentence is strong enough. I think it gives whoever is doing the project wiggle room to make their project as resilient or less resilient as they want when there's going to be a level that we should expect of everyone, because we're trying to work with the water, keep the water back. And if we say, all right, take a look at the sea level rise scenarios and risk tolerance that is appropriate for the expected service life of that project, it's up to the interpretation of the person who is the project leader. I don't know. That's when I read that, I see a general contractor going, oh, well, we don't have to do this. We can just do this, because that's what I see.
I agree that we don't want to direct people to look at multiple sea level rise scenarios. The point of this recommendation is we're directing them to look at one in particular.
Right.
But I do think we need to provide the project planners with the ability to make their own decisions. And the factors there are 3 factors that we're calling out. That is expected sea level rise, expected service life of the project, and risk tolerance is a real factor. And yes, they do get to make their own decision. We're advising them to incorporate these 3 factors into their planning process. And really the only thing that we're making a direction on is to say, of all of the available scenarios, projections, predictions, proposals for sea level rise, here's the one list that we want you to reference. And
Okay.
that is the core of our recommendation, is to cut all the clutter and say, these are the numbers. And please, we're saying please because we're advisory, you know, please put this in your planning process. That's what I was representing to the select board at our last meeting.
Okay.
Yeah. Vince?
Can I offer just a quick
Yep.
idea or opinion, I suppose? Chuck used the idea of, say, an electrical box earlier, but if you take a different idea and say, look at a road, say like Washington Street, that might need to be raised just a little bit, just to be able to accommodate what the service life of the road might be for the next 30 years, for the sake of argument, then you can actually probably end up using a lower projection. And then that road would have to be redone again, say in another 20, 30, 40 years, whatever the time frame, the service time frame for the road might be. So that's where I can see the value for this. You could potentially then just make a distinction between one project and another, say for utilities such as a road, have, you know, you could use one idea or one, you know, use an appropriate, but for say a building like a house or a business, go with the high. Does that make sense, Chuck?
You're muted, Chuck.
So yeah, I think you're getting at it, Vince. So certainly, depending on the project and what's involved, you know, that will drive, you know, the criteria that would be used for design. And a road like Washington Street maybe isn't a good example because it is a critical transportation link, and hence you might actually put more weight on it as opposed to maybe something that that it's more of like just a neighborhood road that has kind of redundant access. And hence, you know, sometimes, you know, during the design, you'd say, you know, because this is a lower impact, it has lower risk to the community, and hence we don't need to add a certain amount of elevation to it to get 30 years of life. And, you know, I think, you know, that's the direction we're going with using this information, is balancing the need for, you know, how much elevation or protection is required to, you know, address, you know, the needs of the community, because we can't raise everything to the same high standard. You know, I'm just looking at it how I would apply it, you know, in practice. And so risk tolerance would be something that has to have, you know, kind of a statement, a consideration, whether it's, you know, this is considered a low risk project because there are other roads.
Okay, Chuck, I'm sorry, I'm going to interrupt. We have a few minutes left. I know that some people need to leave. Sarah, some comments. I know that you're one of the ones that has to run out, so.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Madam Chair. I just, you know, to Chuck's point, I think that is our ultimate goal, and a lot of the nuance is going to be spelled out in the plan, in the, you know, and so, you know, kind of taking a step back, this is our Band-Aid for now. Like, we know this information is important, and it is, it would be, you know, kind of, you know, we would be shirking our duty if we didn't say, you know, make this recommendation at this, you know, but I foresee it as, you know, this is not something that people are going to start, committees are going to start using to make strong policies. I think it's going to be starting to make the consideration. So when something comes before the planning board, this is an example, I've never been on the planning board. The commissioners might say, have you thought about sea level rise? You know, this is an area, you know, whatever, maybe it is one of those really important projects that's going to have a long-term effect. And if those projects come before the Concom or the planning board or something before the full plan is out, we want someone somewhere to ask, have you considered coastal resiliency? And we really think that, you know, and here in the meantime, you know, you should be planning with this. And it's both our duty to do that for the select board. I would hate for someone to come, you know, 20 years down the road and say the town knew this was important, and then that 1 year, you know, anyway, before the plan came out, there was nothing. And so I think I totally agree with what you're talking about, Chuck, but I think it's gonna, the nuance of the different types of projects is gonna come out in the plan. So this is meant to be, maybe not Band-Aid is the right word, but a step in the process.
Okay, can I get a quick show of hands? Gary, I saw you. Actually, Gary, go ahead. You've had your hand up,
Well,
please.
I just think that we all seem to agree that the language in gray is important. It's a very important concept. So let's just figure out, leave it the way it is there or move it up. But we all seem to agree.
Exactly what I was going to propose, Gary.
Right.
Thank you. So quick show of hands for leaving it where it is. Who's in favor of that? 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Okay, it looks like it's staying right there. Last thing we have is to look at our actual recommendation. Let me get a quick show of hands to make the changes the way that they are laid out right there.
Madam Chair,
Yes, Ian?
a quick, where it says the purpose intent, the purpose of the recommendation is to supplement FEMA flood elevation as it does not include sea level rise. The it could actually refer to either the recommendation or the FEMA flood elevations.
Okay, we'll wordsmith that. Thank you, Ian. We're short on time, so I want to get to the actual recommendation. Anyone have an objection to making the changes as shown on the document? Sarah?
Sorry, so the just to go back to the storm surge, because we wordsmith the storm surge later in the document, and that speaks back to, you know, this kind of harkens back to that same thing. So potentially saying something along the lines of sorry.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure who is not able to get through right there. I'm hearing some blips.
So anyway, just to take out the word moderate again, and to maybe insert current, just like we did previously.
Thank you, Sarah. I'm going to assume that that's okay. I know that several other people, Fritz, go ahead, and then Jen, you had your hand up as well.
Yeah, mine's a fairly significant question, I guess, and that's the addition of the language of municipal projects, and the fact that at the very beginning, the comment, Chuck made the comment that this was only for municipal projects. I don't ever remember limiting it in that way.
Right. Jen, were you going to say the same thing?
Yes, I was. I disagree with the addition of municipal projects.
I am of that mind as well. Anybody else want to strike municipal?
Me too. Strike it.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So I think it looks like we're overwhelmingly favorable of striking municipal. It was never our intent to limit this to municipal projects. However, I think our intent was to make our recommendation available, sorry to use that word, to private projects. I don't know. I think our original discussion was that to the extent that a board had review capability over a private project, that they could incorporate this in that review. And to the extent that a private project, which was not being reviewed, wanted guidance on how to incorporate resiliency, that this would be available to them. Does that capture what our intent was previously?
Mm-hmm.
Okay,
yeah,
Fritz?
As a planning board member, my thought has always been that to the extent that as a planning board member, I would be raising the issue with any engineer coming before the board with a project, whether it's public or private, as to whether or not you're taking into account storm surge and sea level rise. So I don't want to have language in there that somebody is going to tell me that this doesn't apply to private projects.
Right. And again, just a reminder, we are not dictating outcomes. We are telling people to use this information for planning purposes. The outcome is up to the project sponsor, whoever that is, private or public. Okay. Is there anything else, Vince, that we need to look at? We are right up against 11 a.m.
Okay.
And if anybody wants to make a motion, I'll entertain a motion to approve this. But if somebody wants to make a motion to continue this discussion, that is also a possibility.
I would
Vince, I'm sorry, Fritz, hang on. Vince, you were going to say something?
Yeah, just a couple of things really quickly. Just Ian's question first. I'll clean the language, but it refers to the FEMA flood elevations. I can add in FEMA flood elevations again, but I can clean that language, no problem. I want to double check with Chuck that changing here projections to scenarios makes sense. And I want to ask about adding a link to some of the NOAA stuff at the end of this sentence here, I think makes sense.
All right, are we in agreement with Vince's proposals, change projection to scenario in that header, add the link, nods all around? Okay, Vince, go ahead and do that. And then anything else? Fritz, if you want to go ahead.
Yes, I would move that we adopt the recommendation as revised at this meeting.
Okay, so I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Peter seconded. Vince, you had a comment?
Just quickly, I know Sarah's under a time pressure. Moderate to current in the wording and getting project back in there. Okay with all of those?
Okay, good. All right, go ahead, Vince.
And I will send this to everybody, and then once we have no complaints by, say, midday, lunchtime, early afternoon tomorrow, I can then send it. Is that okay?
Yeah, so we have to request to be on the select board agenda. All right, I'm going to call for a vote on this. Fritz McClure,
Aye.
Sarah Boyce,
Aye.
Peter Brace,
Aye.
Jennifer Carberg,
Aye.
Ian Golding,
Aye.
Gary Beller. Gary, you're muted.
I just want to say that I'll say aye, but I really think that using the word Nantucket scenarios, sea rise scenarios, is a lot weaker than Nantucket sea rise projections. But since everyone seems to be comfortable with that, I'll say aye, but I don't think it's nearly as meaningful without the word projections.
Thank you, Gary, noted. And Mary Longacre, aye. So Vince will wait 24 hours for any further red flags, and then send it to the select board with a request to be on their August 5th agenda. And 11:02, not bad. Thank you for sticking with us, everyone. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Fritz, second. You don't really all want to stay here, do you?
I'll second this.
I'm sorry, was that Gary seconding?
Yep, yep.
Yeah, thank you, Gary. All those in favor, Fritz,
Aye.
Peter,
Aye.
Jen,
Aye.
Ian,
Aye.
Gary,
Aye.
and Mary Longiger, aye. Thank you all. We'll see you at our regular meeting in August, which is the second Tuesday.
Thank you, Mary. Goodbye, everybody.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.
Aye.
Vince, I'll get you minutes for both meetings before that next meeting.
Appreciate that. Thank you, Fritz. And this will be sent out to everyone as quickly as possible in the next few minutes, hopefully.
Okay, great.
All righty, I'm just going to stop the recording. I just got to stop sharing first.